Then he sent us this. He got a rather friendly reply from one of the researchers. And here's the funny part. He gave him a link to Walt Brown's online book.
Hey, if you want to find out more about the possibility of piezoelectric nuclear,
so
check out this book.
Greetings to the brightest audience in the country. This is Real Science Radio. I'm Fred Williams.
And I'm Doug McBurney, Bible student, science geek, amateur comedian Fred. It is great to be back with you talking about real science on Friday.
Doug, it's great to have you back in the studio.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here.
Radio studio.
Yes.
So today we're going to talk about two near misses.
Two near misses.
Now, two near misses. Now, I'm not talking about, being engaged twice to two different women and then they break off the engagement. And that was two near misses.
Oh, that's bad.
Sorry I had to start the show with that. But
I actually did not see that coming.
Yeah.
So that was...
So two near misses, and we're actually talking about asteroids.
Yeah.
And then also there's an article in the latest Journal of Creation, and it deals with meteorites that have amino acids on them, the type that, were building blocks for life.
Oh.
And
wow.
The secular scientists, they try to use those as arguments for origin of life from outer space.
Sure, yeah.
So there's an article in there that tries to explain the contamination aspect of it, to try to explain it away. But here at Real Science Radio, we're advocates of the Hydroplate Theory, which we believe is a much better explanation. So we're going to look at that article. It's written by a dear friend of ours that has been on Real Science Radio a few times, Dr. Royal Truman.
Yes.
So that'll be fun.
Yeah,
and then there's a story on Micron that you brought to my attention.
Micron, the giant computer conglomerate.
Yes.
Yes.
Company that I currently work for.
Oh, that's right. We don't want to get you in trouble with Micron.
I'm not too worried.
Okay. It's a story that has not only some scientific interest, but socio-economic interest as well.
Yep. Okay.
With what's happening with Micron and the whole issue of computer chips and where they're made and how they're made and who's making them. It's really interesting stuff.
And then also, you're going to provide an update on our Alcohol, Science, and the Bible show that we just finished that series last week.
Yes. I have to get a comment that was made by one of our producers that I want to let everybody know about. And then what else did we have? Well, I don't know if we'll have time to get to the note from a listener in Germany. We may get to that too.
Yeah, we got to, but we'll try, and it's related to Hydroplate Theory.
Yeah.
But Doug, before we do any of this,
yes,
let's do our interesting fact of the week.
Okay. Hey, I'm on a hot streak.
And I'll make sure that this applies to today's show. We try to, at least have it be somewhat of a theme for the show.
Okay.
So are you ready for the interesting fact of the week?
I'm ready, Fred.
All right, here it is. So which two planets in our solar system rotate or spin clockwise?
Oh, well, you did narrow it down to only 8 possibilities. That's helpful. Clockwise.
And clockwise.
Let's see now. I'm just thinking about the Earth. The Earth spins counterclockwise. So you're talking about if you're God up in heaven and you're looking straight down, like at the North Pole of the planet?
Well, that would be one way to look at it. But yeah, they're recognized as spinning clockwise.
Right.
The others spin counterclockwise. The sun spins counterclockwise.
Boy, okay, I'm gonna guess because I have no idea. So I'm gonna say Saturn and the big one, the biggest one. Jupiter, thank you.
It's actually Venus spins clockwise and Uranus spins clockwise on its side.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And so here's what's interesting about that, Doug. And it's actually a good argument for creation.
Okay.
Because I pulled this from the very first thing that showed up on Google search, and it's from Highland College. So this is what they're teaching our kids at school, okay?
Yeah.
And So it's the nebular theory and how our solar system evolved from a contracting nebula. Under the influence of its own gravity, the nebula contracts. As it contracts, it spins faster and faster, much like an ice skater who pulls in her arms. This effect is known as a conservation of angular momentum. Okay, so if that's true, then why do you have two planets spinning the opposite direction? So imagine kids on a merry-go-round, just to explain the conservation of angular momentum. As you spin that merry-go-round really fast and they start falling off, they're going to spin the same direction as the merry-go-round. That's the conservation of angular momentum.
Yeah.
Well, here God's got a sense of humor. He made Venus and Uranus spin a different direction, and so they have to explain it away by like, there must have been a collision in the past and all these other
lots of collisions. Boy, they have a lot of collisions.
Stop and spin the other direction. So, anyways, it's the nebular hypothesis, and it's the most widely accepted model in the field of cosmogony.
That's the way to say it. Cosmogony. Yeah.
And it's supposed to explain the formation and the evolution of the solar system, but there's always these problems that thwart these naturalistic explanations.
Yeah.
Okay, so
very good, Fred. Very good.
So a listener sent us an article from Phys.org.
Phys. Love it.
Phys.org.
Yes.
And it's on the 2-day visit by two different near-Earth asteroids.
Oh, yeah. I've been following this. This is interesting stuff.
It really is interesting. And one of them, as it turns out, and this was reported just, a week and a half ago, Doug?
Yeah.
Middle of July, that one of these near misses, one of these asteroids, 2011 UL-21.
Yep.
Guess what, Doug? It has a moon.
Oh.
And they were, of course, surprised to see it has a moon.
Right.
All of these asteroids, we're finding so many of them.
Binary.
Contact binary.
Yes.
And they have this one, the latest discovery, another Walt Brown discovery, working for Walt Brown. NASA continues to work for Walt Brown.
Yeah. We can send them one of those signs, and they can stick it on that moon if they're ever able to get close to it. The working for Walt Brown sign.
Yep. And then this other near-miss asteroid, it's rotating counterclockwise, so it's kind of, fitting. A lot of these things rotate counterclockwise. And in fact, right now we're showing an animation of this asteroid. And this guy is a lot smaller, and it also was a near miss. Now, Doug, we were talking about this earlier before the show. Kevin Lee had a great point that in the judgment that is yet to come, it seems like if it was rocks that left the Earth in the fountains of the Great Deep, the first judgment, fountains of the Great Deep, according to Hydroplate Theory, shot all these meteors and asteroids up into space.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen in Revelation?
Well, there's an old saying, what goes up must come down.
Yeah.
So if the Earth cast off this violent explosion of all these rocks flying off into space, and now they've assumed orbits, I mean, there has to be some statistical probability that some of them would come back to where they came from. I would think.
Yeah. And if God uses them as part of the judgment in the future, use rocks from a judgment, the final judgment, that's an interesting idea.
Well, and you might wonder, how is it that God could predict the future so accurately? Well, he can do the math on where the rocks are and the orbit, and he knows exactly when it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. So, and scary, by the way. So if you haven't believed the gospel that Jesus Christ can save you from hell and destruction and damnation forever, send us an email. We'd be happy to share that with you. And then no matter what falls on you from space, you're going to be okay.
True enough.
That's right.
Okay. So speaking of stuff falling on you from space, there was a really interesting article in the Journal of Creation. This is volume 38, number 2, 2024. And as mentioned earlier, this is from a friend of Real Science Radio, Dr. Royal Truman. Yeah, we had a couple of great shows where he just thoroughly refutes the origin of life ideas that these secular scientists try to come up with. There's no way that could possibly happen.
Yeah.
You should go back and watch those shows. And also Dr. James Tour, our interview with him in January 2024. He also has great stuff that just totally refutes origin of life. Well, anyways, the title of this article is Contamination of Meteorite Samples with Terrestrial Amino Acids.
Terrestrial amino acids.
And so if you're a advocate of the hydroplate theory, that makes a ton of sense, right? But unfortunately, the major creation groups, a lot of people don't even know about the hydroplate theory, and we're trying to get that out there so that more and more know about this, because what this article does is it looks at it, particularly a meteorite that crashed in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And it makes the case that this meteorite has proteinogenic amino acids, and they're due to contamination. Now, what are proteinogenic amino acids? Those are ones that are the building blocks of life. You know, the 20 amino acids that are help form a protein. You've got non-proteinogenic amino acids that aren't related to that particular biosynthesis process. So they're finding these on this meteorite and other meteorites as well. And so they make a case in this article, and I think a pretty compelling case, that a lot of this is due to contamination.
You're saying that as this was an asteroid, you said? A meteorite.
Yeah.
As this meteorite hit the Earth, there was some contamination that happened.
Yeah, or by the time they got to it and dug it up.
Oh, sure, because it laid there for a while.
You know, and it's in a humid, arid region.
Okay, there definitely could be some. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they also look at the, and I hope I say this right, Murchison meteorite, which landed in Australia. You're going to have different conditions there. But anyways, they're making a pretty good case that a lot of this amino acids they're finding, the life-bearing amino acids, that they're from contamination. Okay. Now, they still need more information to know just how much, because they believe that some of them could have been on the meteorite. They don't explicitly say that, but they do say there's a small percentage that may have been on the meteorite.
Wow.
Well, they're trying to kind of, in a way, they're trying to refute the secular argument that meteorites have life that could start original life. Right types of
the whole idea that
amino acids.
like a few of these proteinogenic amino acids are on a meteorite that falls to the Earth, and somehow that leads to the origin of life. That whole
And so this article tries to make the case, well, that's contamination. Well, that could be, but we did a show with Kevin Lee. Back in, I think, March or April, and we'll reference those shows. Great shows. And there's this asteroid Bennu.
Yeah, in fact, I've got from the 55th edition of the LPSC, published 2024, the presence of racemic protein and non-protein amino acids in the Bennu aggregate indicates that these compounds were likely formed by abiotic chemical reactions on the parent body. Now, Bennu, they got the samples. They scraped it off Bennu while it was in space, so it wasn't laying in the jungle in Costa Rica.
So the contamination argument isn't going to work very well, in my opinion, with Bennu.
Not for Bennu.
Real difficult, because they're getting this right off the meteor, the asteroid, and there's not the opportunity for contamination with meteorites that they're digging up on Earth that who knows how long they've been there. Maybe they have an idea how long they've been there, but there's still going to be some contamination. On the one that hit Costa Rica, there's even vegetation on it. So right there, there's some contamination.
There should be some signs of life.
Nobody disputes that. But, one of the authors of this article, I believe, is an author of also the one that Dr. Royal Truman refers to in the Journal of Creation article. But Bennu, again, you're not going to have a very strong argument, in our opinion, at Real Science Radio that you can say that this was due to contamination.
All right.
So this really is looking like these amino acids, the life-bearing amino acids, the proteinogenic amino acids, they really are on that meteor, or that asteroid. Right. And as you noted, it said they think it came from a parent body. Let's call it Earth. Lee would said in his show, let's call that parent body Earth. So
from now on, whenever someone references a parent body in relation to an asteroid or a meteorite, they have to make a payment to Kevin Lee when they say, let's call that Earth.
And let's just say that whenever you hear that, you can interpret as Earth.
Yes.
That's what
just
that means.
Assume that's Earth.
The secular scientists aren't going to say it's Earth. They're going to deny it's Earth. And by the way, Bennu also has materials consistent with coming from, remember, Doug? A watery
A
planet.
watery planet, right?
How many watery planets are there in the solar in the universe that we've found?
So far, we've found one.
Yeah, we found one. I mean, they think that Mars had water on it. They think it had a global flood and all this, nonsense for a planet that looks pretty dry to me when you look at it with a telescope or, images of it. But anyways, we think that we're hoping that creation groups, our friends at Creation Ministries International, we love those guys, and ICR, Answers in Genesis.
All those guys.
Just right now, there seems to be this kind of paradigm that still exists because of the catastrophic plate tectonics was originally pushed onto the creations, the creationists.
It was shoehorned into the creation story there.
And a lot of these guys are friends, and it's just like Kevin Lee said, if something's wrong, you got to get to the point where you just got to humbly admit that, hey, we got to move on from a theory that has so many problems.
Yeah, hey, and we have a lot of really smart people involved in creationism. And before we move on away from the asteroids, Fred, I have a question that I want to pose to you and that I want to pose to all the smart people out there in the audience, because I know we have numerous credentialed, degreed professionals who listen to the show. And as I was researching the 2011 UL-21 near-miss asteroid story, I came across this article from Newsweek magazine. Don't laugh, don't throw tomatoes. Yeah, Newsweek. Every once in a while, I was trying to flesh out and check, I try to double, triple source all the information. So I'm just looking around, and yeah, sometimes Newsweek even makes the cut. But I'm reading this quote from one of the principal scientists at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Lance Benner, who I'm not sure what a principal scientist is, but I think that's an official. That's a smart guy. That's a guy he knows math and stuff. So he's smarter than I am, that's for sure. Well, listen to what he said about the discovery of this binary system around the UL-21 near-miss asteroid. He says, now listen to me, quote, "It is thought that about 2/3 of asteroids of this size are binary systems, and their discovery is particularly important because we can use measurements of their relative positions to estimate their mutual orbits, masses, and densities, which provide key information about how they may have formed." How does knowing their what does he say? Their relative positions, their mutual orbits, masses, and densities. If you have those data points, how does that help you? How does that provide any information about how they formed? Can you help me with that, Fred? I'm mystified.
That one, yeah, I am too. And you know what I suspect, Doug, is they have these extra data points. So they can make a story that they come up with more palatable to the naive.
That's it.
Make it sound like they were onto something by, hey, we know this, and this, and so
that's it,
this
Fred.
is not formed. I mean, that's what I think. That happens a lot. Yeah.
You add a bunch of statistical information, some data points about here's the specific mutual orbit, the mass, the density. And then you tell the story about how it forms, and everyone thinks you must know what you're talking about because you knew the density and the mass.
And to get it to pass peer review, because they want to try to look, I don't want, use the word professional or honest or intellectually honest. They'll use the word may have formed.
Oh, yes,
So
you're right.
Sure, does this one use the word may?
It says...
Because you haven't shown me this.
Key information about how they may have formed. You're right.
So they always have to throw that in to, protect themselves.
Okay, so if there are any astrophysicists, physicists, math teachers who are... And you can help me understand what I'm missing here, please do. Okay.
Yeah, so, and just to remind the audience, too, again, this publication from NASA, this is just from March 2024 on the Bennu sample,
right?
Where they're finding these amino acids, these proteinogenic amino.
Yeah, and the Bennu sample, by the way, it landed, if I'm not mistaken, it was in Utah or New Mexico. It landed in the desert and it was sealed up in a pod. It made it through the atmosphere onto the surface of the Earth, the capsule with the Bennu samples. And so by definition, there wasn't any leaks because we got the samples. If it was a leaky pod that could have been contaminated, we would have lost the samples because it came hurtling back to Earth through the atmosphere.
Got to use this reference again for the third show in a row. It didn't land in Flint, Michigan, and get all contaminated.
It didn't land in the water up there in Flint, huh?
You'd have to go back to our alcohol show to get that reference.
Yeah, we're beating up Flint pretty badly, but you know, that's when you can't get the water right. That's pretty embarrassing, at least in America.
Yep, exactly.
All right, so what do we have next here, Fred? We've done our proteinogenic amino acids.
Well, speaking of the alcohol show, I know that in our production meeting, you had somebody ask a question, and I wanted to make sure that you provided an update on that because you didn't get a chance to say it in our Alcohol, Science, and the Bible show.
Yes, and one of the points we took on in the show was, could Jesus have made alcoholic wine and offered it to a room full of people who had obviously already been drinking without tempting them to sin? Because we know God says he tempts no man to sin. So Jesus could not have tempted anyone to sin and remained righteous. So that's one of the basis of the argument that, well, the wine he made must not have been alcoholic because, you know. So Jesus providing wine for a group of guests who obviously had already been drinking. Well, God provides numerous things to human beings that we abuse in sin. Food and drink being two of the biggest ones, right? So, in fact, let's go to the Last Supper. Let's go to the Last Supper. Jesus offered wine and bread. Now, he didn't just offer it. He gave it, and he gave a command along with it. You know, eat this. This is my body. Drink this. This is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me, right? There's a command involved there. Well, when Jesus handed food and wine to a group of men who had already been eating and drinking, that could be perceived as a temptation to them for gluttony and drunkenness, because they could have just continued to eat to the point of gluttony or drank to the point of drunkenness. Yeah. But that wouldn't have been on Jesus. That would have been their free will choice to sin with something good that God gave them, which is almost everything we have is good that God gave us. All good gifts come from above.
Yeah.
And we can abuse them and sin with them, but that's not on God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great point. So good question by one of the people on our production team.
So, well, actually, the answer was formulated by one of our producers, and I really appreciate
exactly.
That was really good stuff.
Yeah,
good
definitely.
stuff.
So, hey, Doug, you mentioned this story about Micron. I haven't had a chance to really dig into it, but I work at Micron. As a firmware engineer, been there over 11 years now. So what's the scoop on Micron?
So Micron is getting big bags of money from the government, but not as big as you might think. So you've heard of the CHIPS Act, right?
Yeah.
So the Biden administration, which, by the way, we are basically living in a version of the Soviet Union now, where the government partners with giant corporations who are friendly with them and donate to them, and they get in on, well, $100 billion, which is but allegedly Micron will spend about $100 billion over the next 2 decades to build factories to make computer chips.
Okay, so not Lay's chips.
Not Lay's chips. No, not Fritos. not Fritos, but computer chips. Because it turns out, Fred, half the chips in the world are manufactured in Taiwan by one company. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TMSC, a very famous company.
Yeah.
And so they make about half the chips in the world, and they make almost all of the advanced, especially military high-tech chips. And so some genius in the government noticed that, gee, all of our military and high-tech infrastructure is reliant on one company on an island.
That China is breathing down their necks.
Right.
Now I wonder why.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned that, Fred. The folks in Taiwan can't be too thrilled that the American government has decided we need a backup plan for computer chips, because it almost seems like maybe they're not going to help Taiwan if China does decide to take some sort of military action. So that's a whole, like I said, there's socioeconomic, geopolitical, all kinds of stories here with what's happening with the computer chips. So Micron They're going to build a factory in Clay, New York, which tells you this is a government project, because no business interested in making money would build a factory in the state of New York. No, they would go to Tennessee, they would go to North Carolina. They were
trying to leave New York.
Yes, they would not go to New York. They go to Texas.
So they're going to go to New York, obviously with some kind of tax break. It has to be a tax break involved, because otherwise, why would a company go to New York?
Right.
Liberal haven of New York.
No, nobody would, but they're going to, because for this one company, for a brief period of time, the government is going to make it so that they can be profitable even in New York. And that takes a special deal. Then Chuck Schumer gets a cut, and everybody gets a cut. Nancy Pelosi's in San Francisco; she gets a cut. Anyway, it all works its way out. They're also going to build a factory in Boise, Idaho.
Yeah, that's Micron's headquarters.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
See, it's a government business partnership. So part of it'll make sense.
Yeah.
And part of it will be just complete boondoggle.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So you can bet that the factory in Boise will probably actually be profitable long term because the private company, but the one in New York, it'll close down in about 10 years and everyone will go broke, and they'll have a fire sale for all the office equipment. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. Now,
pledge any profit sharing check I get this next year, because Micron stock is doing really well.
Oh, great.
I'll donate to Real Science Radio to help promote the channel.
All right. I love it. All right. So some of that government largesse might make its way back to Real Science Radio. I love it. Well, now listen to this. Micron is going to receive $2 to $3 billion in job creation tax credits. So just stop right there for the average person. When you say 2 to 3 billion, that's an enormous difference. There's an enormous difference between 2 billion and 3 billion. It's 1,000 million different. Anyway, but to the government, it's like it's decimal points, right? They shave. So they're going to receive these job creation tax credits, and they're allegedly going to save billions more on sales taxes. And listen to the way this is reported. Tell me we're not living in the Soviet Union. The final tax credits will be listed on Micron's private tax returns, so the public may never know the exact dollar cost of all the incentives. So treating money that the government decides to not take by force from a company, the reporter reports that as if it's a cost. That's not a cost. That's Micron's money that the government's going to let them keep a little bit of it for a little while. Anyway, so my question to you, Fred, does Micron make computer chips already?
Yes.
They do.
Yes.
Thank heaven.
So, yeah, Micron's bread and butter is DRAM chips. Those are the memory chips in, like, the laptops we have here.
Okay.
You go to Best Buy and, you want to get something that has a lot of memory. Their bread and butter is DRAM memory.
Okay.
So, if you get a 16 gig PC or laptop with that much memory, you want a lot of memory if you're going to be doing a lot of stuff. So Micron is really high up the food chain in DRAM memory.
Okay. Yep. All right. So they actually have some manufacturing capability in this area.
Yes. I'm not sure where all their factories are. I know that there's, some in Singapore. I don't care about that stuff. I'm on a need-to-know basis when I do my job at Micron. Especially at this point in my career. So I don't know a lot about the other ins and outs, but we're in the solid state part of their business.
Okay, but they have factories with silica and clean rooms and guys with the bonnets and the glasses. Oh, that's good. Yeah. Because, with some of the boondoggles that have happened over the last 20 years with some of the solar companies, and I mean, guys who basically came out of investment banking were suddenly going to make circular solar panels that were going to change the world, and suddenly $300 million was gone and nobody knew what happened. Yeah. Well, at least, and I know that a lot of this CHIPS Act money went to Intel as well, and I know Intel actually makes chips.
Oh, absolutely. They make like the processors.
Yes. And so I just want to say, from a geopolitical, socioeconomic standpoint, while I am generally opposed to the boondoggle of the government partnering with business to invest in pretty much anything, because of the critical nature of some of these chips to our defense infrastructure, I think there's a legitimate cause here for the government to be involved in creating a backup to this one company in Taiwan.
I agree. It seems like a reasonable contingency plan.
Yeah.
And, from what you're saying, a pretty good move. Again, it's funny because I work at Micron, and I don't go, and everybody who works with me knows at this point in my career, I don't go to meetings. I don't go to these corporate, they have these, every 2 months they've got, they do their slides and
Oh, yeah.
doing. I don't go to those anymore.
No,
I don't go to those.
you're not required to show the face.
A lot of stuff that happens there. I just, I do my job, and I, enjoy the people I work with, and we do work on some really interesting stuff and interesting technology, but I don't get involved in the politics.
Okay.
Other than I get annoyed by their woke policies that they have at Micron. I have no problem saying that. I wish they wouldn't, they wouldn't go there, but that's just part of where corporations are going, and it's too bad. It's like, you're going to discriminate against, they basically discriminate against Christians to a certain level. When you promote a woke agenda, because if you have any objections to it, then you're going to get in trouble. But it's a good company as far as they're treating employees. They're a good place to work in that regard, but not for the wokeness and all that stuff.
Okay, and so, and they're not going to be involved in the massive theft of hundreds of billions of dollars that's going to occur around this CHIPS Act. No. They're just trying to retain some of the money that the government has taken from them over the last 20 years in confiscatory taxes and get in on a business opportunity. So I can't blame them for that.
No.
So they're not going to be to blame for any of that. And because they and Intel actually do manufacture things that people buy without being forced by the government, there's a good chance that some of this will actually work and provide some benefit for America going forward, which proves that even a brain-dead communist pervert like Joe Biden can fall backwards into something beneficial. Yeah. That's what a great civilization our forefathers handed us, that even a guy like him can stumble backwards and do something right. Yep. So there you go. So good luck to Micron, and we may send you, Fred, on assignment to one of the corporate meetings at Micron, just so you can go and see if, I made a prediction about peak woke when the plagiarist at Harvard was actually forced to resign. I don't even know if you remember that story. Yeah. The president of Harvard, who was a quota hire, she was exposed as a plagiarist and then exposed like 5 more times as a plagiarist. Each time it was more and more egregious, the obvious plagiarism. And she was stealing really awful material, which was embarrassing, so they finally actually had to fire her, or she had to resign. I forget. And I said, if she resigns, this will be the high watermark of woke, at least in this algorithm, or what do you call this wave of woke?
Yeah.
Her and so maybe you go back to one of these meetings at Micron, you might notice that the woke wave has backed off a little bit. Yeah. We may have to send Fred on assignment to investigate the woke environment.
So speaking of all this, Doug, I beat Medicare. Sorry, that was a pretty bad impersonation. But
I didn't see that one coming either, but that was pretty good.
Okay, so another story that's actually going to take us back to the hydroplate. So this is from a listener from Germany. So he wrote to the Department of Physics at, let's see, where's this at?
Payam-e-Nur University in Iran.
Oh, gotcha.
Persia.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So here's what this listener, he sent us this email he wrote to them. He says, I hope you all are doing well. I am not a scientist, but I'm interested in the research you have done related to the article Monte Carlo Methods to Simulate the Propagation of Created Atomic Nuclear Particles from Underground Piezoelectric Rocks Inside the Fractures Before or During Earthquakes.
That's the title of the paper. Wow.
Yeah. And he goes on to say, could it be possible massive earthquakes in the past have accelerated nuclear decay and affected the results of radiometric dating methods? He says, thank you very much, blah, blah, and he gives his name from Germany.
Yeah, yeah.
So then he sent us this. He got a rather friendly reply from one of the researchers, and here's the funny part. He gave him a link to Walt Brown's online book.
Hey, if you want to find out more about the possibility of piezoelectric nuclear, check out this book. Oh, wow.
So this guy responds to him and gives him a few things and says, oh, by the way, here's this online book that might be beneficial for your interest in the subject. Brown, W. in the beginning, compelling evidence for creation and the flood.
Wow.
So you couldn't get away with that at Stanford or Harvard, but you can. I mean, as bad as Iran is and wicked regime, this kind of stuff you can get away with there because they're going to support, creation.
Well, they believe that God created everything. They're not completely irrational.
No, they're not. And, it's not like because they're in a oppressive regime that it makes people dumb there. It doesn't. I mean, no. I remember when I was a team lead at McData, they asked me, we just started outsourcing from India. And the VP of engineering asked me if, what's the quality of the engineers here? And I'm like, I've found that people are people. You've got some that are really good, some that are average, and some that aren't so good. You find the same thing in America and probably anywhere you go. So where you live doesn't dictate of how smart you are.
Oh, no way.
So these guys in Iran, they're not going to be dummies, and they're not going to be bridled by secular oppression, censorship, things like this. And so they're making, they're interesting research. So I just thought that was cool. This guy wrote them as a hydroplate theory guy, but not saying that. And this this scientist from Iran, here, check out Walt Brown's book.
Here's a book that helps.
Walt Brown, who got his PhD from MIT in mechanical engineering, and was the government or the Army's top scientist.
Yeah.
So highly credible person.
Well, I would say the most credentialed creationist in the history of the movement.
So far, without a doubt. That's just an argument that we can easily defend. So
yeah.
Anyways,
so how amazing is this? Someone at the Department of Physics at Payam-e-Nur University in Persia. I don't like the name Iran. That's it was Persia for like 3,000 years. So why don't we stick with Persia?
Sang a song, Iran, the flock of seagulls. Bad reference there.
That is a flock of seagulls. Wow. Oh, that's right. You're a keyboard player. You're a keyboard player. You would be familiar.
One of our bands.
But anyway, the professor at the Department of Physics there over in Iran, so he may not be free to parade down the street and rant about his sexuality, but he is free to read a book written by a creationist because it contains good scientific information. Not that I support the Iranian regime, I just want to point that out.
Yeah. Yep.
So America, we've got our issues too.
So Doug, we got one more article I'd like to get to. We're almost out of time for this news update show we're doing. So this one is titled "Scientists Uncover Protein Folding Secrets Through Sound."
Oh, man.
So I found this super interesting. So they're using sound to basically hear how protein folding happens to help them better understand it.
Yeah.
So they say by converting their data into sound, scientists discovered how hydrogen bonds contribute to the lightning fast gyrations that transform a string of amino acids into a functional folding proteins. So they could listen to the sounds. So they would map this to sounds.
Because it's too fast to actually watch, right? Yeah.
But when they map it to sounds, they could actually hear, the hydrogen bonds forming, by different, pitch levels and whatnot that we can make out when we listen, with our ears. So, and it says here, if the correct conditions for bonding occurred, the software program played a pitch corresponding to that bond when the correct ones occurred. That's so interesting.
Wow.
And it says in our auditory system, we're really very attuned to small differences in frequency, and that's true. A lot of times we're not aware of that. We don't pick it out. But, playing in a band, and I know you play a musical instrument, if you kind of more in tune with that, and I've had to be, because when you're like programming a keyboard sound to sound like the record, a synthesized sound or whatever, a synthesizer like maybe something from Supertramp or whatever.
Sure, so you're trying to cover something. It needs to sound pretty close to
different pitches. And so I got used to hearing those pitches. And my wife is a fraternal twin with her sister, and they both sound the same.
Yeah.
But I'm one of only, sometimes her mom could tell them apart, but I'm one of the few people that can, only because they have a slightly different pitch. Their voices are the same, but Landy, her sister Landy, has a more curved pitch, where Sandy's is flatter, her pitch when she's talking. And I can make out that bulb in the curve.
Oh, wow.
And I was the only, they were all amazed when, it was like Landy would call and I'm like, oh, hi, Landy. And
everyone else is.
everybody, they don't know if it's sandy or random. So,
Right.
so you can train yourself to hear those, and it's not that hard. But if you're not thinking about it, then you might not notice small pitch differences. Well, they can program this in to make it even more distinct, so you can really notice that. It's super cool. They included water molecules in the simulation because water, the hydrogen bonding analysis, it's essential to understanding the process. So they said that half the energy from a protein folding reaction comes from the water and not from the protein. So water does a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So super interesting.
Amazing. Yeah, and I found it really interesting at the beginning. They talk about these, they say a folding protein will form a series of hydrogen bonds internally and with the water molecules that surround it. In the process, the protein wiggles into countless potential intermediate conformations, sometimes hitting a dead end and backtracking until it stumbles onto a different path. So they're listening to this protein folding, amazing process to form a functional protein. And that sounds to me like when an error occurs, there is some error correction mechanism. It backtracks and finds the correct path.
There's elaborate error correction. Where does error correction come from? How do you explain that with evolution?
Well, yeah.
You can't explain the folding process, let alone this correction process that's behind it, the quality control system. It's remarkable.
And how do the editors at news-medical.net, how do you report on that and say that it stumbles onto a different anything? There's no stumbling going on. That's not stumbling.
Yeah.
It's so fast we can't even watch it. We have to figure out a way to try to keep track of it.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. It's the glory of the Creator God. We all know where it came from. You all know where it came from, and that's why we're here on Real Science Radio.
That's right. And they use this also knowing that because we're in a fallen creation, when it happens and it breaks, so it doesn't survive the error correction in the quality control system and it breaks through. It mentions how misfolding proteins contribute to things like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, cystic fibrosis, and other disorders. So it's good. This kind of research is good because it helps them understand, this process better and how it may go awry and maybe be able to find ways to help treat, some of these ailments. But
yes. And if the researchers were looking at these processes with a worldview based on a perfect creation that's fallen and needs to be fixed, I'm certain we would make much more dramatic progress than when all of the researchers are looking at this as an accidental stumbling system.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It really impedes progress.
I'm certain.
Evolution is long for decades since it's brought into the scientific realm. It impedes the progress of science. We know that. We have tons of examples throughout the years.
Yes.
People having, organs removed that actually turn out to be useful. You've got immunology, which is a great treatment that's improving, cancer survival rates. Yep. And they weren't looking at that for a while because they just thought it was all random, created by evolution.
Right,
and it's like, no, this is a design system to help the body fight off, pathogens.
Right.
All of this stuff is just remove your evolutionary baggage. Any scientist, we know we get atheists listening to the show. If you're a scientist, PhD scientist in biology, whatnot, or maybe you're an agnostic, or you just, you've been so brainwashed by the colleges you went to and the public school systems and that Dr. Seuss book you read in grade school. All that stuff's nonsense.
Yeah.
It's so obvious that everything was designed, and we ask you to join us in promoting the truth of creation. And as Doug said, this has got eternal consequences. So,
Amen. And thank God that researchers, I think, in their daily work, no matter their worldview, just by the nature of the way God made everything, they're forced to seek the truth. If you want to do research that's beneficial, you have to seek the truth. And so I think a lot of researchers, they may be retarded and impeded by their evolutionary worldview, but God built in structures, the truth that are going to guide them into, even like Joe Biden, they'll stumble backwards into something good. No, and I'm sure they do better than just stumble backwards. But exactly. I think they do a lot of stumbling based on the evolutionary worldview, and we're here to help cure that problem here on Real Science Radio. And we're glad that you've tuned in, and thank you, Fred. It was awesome, fun stuff.
Great to have you back in the studio. So, for Doug McBurney, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. May God bless you.